Hello, welcome. I want to thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about a subject that's unusual to common experience. We're going to be talking about why you need a soul coach. And we'll move into that, but I want to start out with a few personal experiences. I went to college in my hometown, and as a result I lived at home, and my dad could get his hands on me anytime he wanted to. So when I was a sophomore in college, my dad said, "Tom, let's sit down, I want to have a conversation with you." And we sat down, and he proceeded to explain to me, "Tom, your mother and I are spending good money on your college education." And he said, "Where is this whole thing headed? I mean, what do you intend to specialize in? What do you intend to major in?" And I'm embarrassed to tell you that before he asked me that question, I had not given it 1 second's thought. However, I was astonished at my answer to him. In fact, even as I stand before you today, I am still astonished at how I answered that question. I said, "Dad, how can I decide what I want to do with my life until I find out why I've been put here in the first place?" And my dad was a very practical man, and he looked at me, rolled his eyes, got up and left the room. But I have to tell you that I have been absolutely fascinated with that question ever since I surprised myself by articulating it. In other words, why are we here in the first place? I call that a primary question. In fact, I call that the primary question. Nobody ever asks that question. They ask questions instead like, where should I live? Who should I marry? What should I do for a profession? These are all secondary questions. And consequently, almost everyone you meet on the street is living a secondary life concerned with secondary preoccupations. Nobody asks what I call the big one. Nobody asks, why have I been put here in the first place? So people are living subordinate lives concerned about subordinate concerns. And I've always been very focused on this basic question, why I've been put here in the first place. Now, I've been around the track 61 times. And in that time, I've run into several people who had remarkable stories. And I've kept kind of a mental file and put all of these stories in the mental file. So over the years, I've developed a series of exercises that will assist people in discovering why they were put here in the first place, or what is the unique purpose, what is the specific task, what is the meaning that they and they alone can fulfill, all right? I refer to this as the big one, and keeping in mind very few people ever ask it. I was introduced to a lady named Maxine who was in the administration of our local community college. And she was going through some things, and a mutual friend introduced her to me. We went through these exercises. They were very, very meaningful to Maxine. So about the third time we had our exercise, we used to meet in a restaurant over a Coke or a coffee. The third time that we got together, Maxine began by saying, "Tom, I've got this good friend Joyce, and we have lunch every week, and I've been telling her about these exercises, and she had had some real dynamic experiences with the exercises. And she said, when I refer to you, I call you my soul coach." So, when I heard that, I had to hold on to the booth. Soul coach, what an incredible notion. I mean, I embraced that like a little kid holds on to a balloon at the zoo. I never would have been so audacious as to call myself a soul coach, but I do now. Maxine turned the light bulb on for me. She had such an excellent experience with these exercises that she was able to get the class as a marquee course in the local community college. This winter it will have been taught for the third consecutive year. The class is always oversubscribed. I might also say, tongue-in-cheek, it's probably the best place in this area to meet women. It's something that's quite interesting to ladies, and I'm delighted with that. It's interested to a few sensitive gentlemen, all right? It's happening more and more and more, but I think what we have to do is present it to the gentleman in a different context. I want to read you something that illustrates what this class is all about. I've got a friend named Vanessa who took the class, and again, had a very, very good experience with it. And I want you to visualize, she's standing in front of our church fellowship. this is the last Sunday when she's going to attend church, and in the future she's going to be going and become a missionary in Mexico. And here are her farewell remarks to the congregation. My good friend Tom helped me find the dream that I had buried all through these years. Later I came to understand that that dream was actually my call. I'm grateful that God opened my heart so that I could accept that call. Let me read it again. My good friend Tom has helped me find the dream that I had buried all through these years. Later I came to understand that dream was my call. I'm grateful that God opened my heart so that I could accept that call. The reason why we all need a soul coach is because we've all done that. We've all taken our dreams and buried them so long ago we forgot what they were and we forgot where we buried them. But the importance of finding that dream and getting back in touch with it is because it's actually your call. Some people think it's only theologians or missionaries that are called. We're all called, and we're called every day. When you go out on vacation, let's say you're in a vacation setting and all your responsibilities are behind you, and you feel that itch, that discomfort, that angst. That's your call. And you don't know what to do with it. You don't know where the telephone is. You don't know how to answer it. And if you did, you wouldn't understand what it said. But I'm telling all of you people, the viewers included, we're all being called. Now, we have some exercises that we do, one of which is to write a speech to the graduating class of the high school from which you graduated. Almost to a person, everybody who writes this speech will admonish these beautiful high school seniors that are all set to leave the incubator. One of the main admonitions in everyone's speech is, and it's said in different ways, but here's the notion: follow your dream. Follow your dreams. Don't be afraid to follow your dreams. And the reason why that is such a poignant comment is because all the people giving the speech to the high school class are not doing that. They've forgotten their dreams. They've buried them. They don't recall. They can't get in touch. So Vanessa says, Tom helped me find the dream that I had buried all through these years, and I came to understand that that dream was actually my call. Why do you need a soul coach? Because we're all being called, friends. Big time. And we all know that. Another exercise that we do is we ask people to try to get in touch with the major turning points in their lives and when they occurred. In terms of Vanessa, she said, well, I just feel 8 years old. I feel 8 years old is a pivotal time. And despite what we tried to do to try to determine what happened at 8 years of age, she couldn't get in touch with it. One of the things that scared her the most or frightened her the most was becoming, frankly, a missionary to Mexico. So we tried to peel the onion back a little bit, and she said, well, I've always wanted to do something like this, even since I've been a little girl. She said, when I first heard about the Peace Corps, President Kennedy talk about the Peace Corps, every time I had a good friend, I'd say to my friend, listen, when we grow up, let's go into the Peace Corps. Or if I had a good boyfriend or a good girlfriend, I'd say, when we graduate, let's go into the... And nobody would ever do it. So I never did it. Nobody would do it with me. And as we were talking, she was telling me about her particular job, and she said, you know, I can retire if I just stay at my job in another 7 years when I'm 55. And we talked about all of this, and I've got this unusual habit that after a conversation is over, I replay it and replay it and replay it. So I was driving home after our interview, and I'm thinking to myself, well, if she's going to be 55 in 7 years, that means that she's 48. And then I thought to myself, and this was just disconnected thinking, and I thought, well, President Kennedy, we were having our meeting in the year 2000. And I thought, President Kennedy was elected in 1960. Well, you take 1960 from, that's 40. What happens when you take 40 from 48? You get 8. Vanessa couldn't figure out why she felt 8 years old. I had her home number, and when I got home, I called. I said, you know, Kennedy was inaugurated in 1960, and this is the year 2000, so that's 40 years ago. And Vanessa said, yeah, yeah. And I said, well, and I just figured out, you know, you're retiring in 70, so you're 48, right? Yeah, yeah. And I said, well, what if we took 40 years from 48, how old would you be? She said, well, I would be 8. And then I said, Vanessa, how old would you be if we took 40 from your current age? And she said, I would be 8. I would be 8. Bingo. So in other words, that's how you excavate these dreams. She first got the dream when she was 8 years old. She heard about the Peace Corps, all right? And she didn't know why she felt 8. She didn't know what to do with this Peace Corps thing. Why you need a soul coach? You've got to go back. See, we've all forgotten. We've all forgotten. Let me give you another example. Perry was an individual who lived in my hometown, my former hometown. Every September, he would appear before the city council, and he would petition the city council to issue an edict banning the burning of leaves in the fall. The first year that he appeared, he came in with statistics about asthma, and he came in with statistics about the ozone layer. And the city council, in their wisdom, decided to table his request. So the next year he came in with petitions, okay? And during the hearing, there was some finger pointing and some name calling. And the city council, in their wisdom, tabled it again to the second year. So the third year he comes in, he's bringing in friends, supporters. They took up almost the whole council chamber. And this particular hearing, there was fist shaking and name calling. And the city council, in their wisdom, tabled it. The fourth year, our friend did not appear. Instead, he was arrested at the local Holiday Inn and charged with arson. This is the most critical story I can tell you, because here's the situation. This man had all the pyrotechnics were going on inside him, and he was trying to solve the problem out here, okay? Not only do we bury our dreams, but we project everything that's going on inside us outside. I call Perry is my nickname for a person who is a paradoxical. In other words, he gets it all backwards. It was going on in here, and he was trying to solve it out there. Frankly, friends, we're all paradoxicals. We're all doing that. We either bury our treasure and forgot where we buried it, or we take what's going on, good and bad, and project it outside, so that we ourselves are an empty fortress. Okay? And what I want to try to tell you is the reason why you need a soul coach is you're engaged in both of these methodologies. You're burying your dreams and you're projecting your treasure. One of the hardest things, and Nancy has told me this, and I think she's absolutely right, one of the hardest things to convince a person of is that they're valuable. They themselves have value. People will reject that faster than anything. And the fact of the matter is, we're treasure chests of profound talent, ability, and value, but we buried it or we projected it away. What's left? What's Perry's profession? I'll tell you what his profession is. He's a junk dealer. If you bury your treasure or project your treasure, what's left? The junk. We're living our lives dealing in junk and moving it from one part of the desk to the other. We're living a life that anybody could live. It's no surprise, I mean, I'm not telling you anything unusual about how competitive the environment is that we live in. You don't have to be competitive to be yourself. Then why are we competitive? We're competing for the lives that people arbitrarily dole out like they're dealing cards at Las Vegas. And we're grabbing them because we don't know who we are. Why would somebody have to be competitive to live their own life? It's that they don't know what their life is, and they're competing for the lives that are doled out by the culture. Okay? They forgot who they are. Just like Vanessa had buried her dream years and years ago and forgot about it. She'd forgotten about this 8-year-old. There's a matron lady in our church named Alice. She's 82 years old. Every church has someone in their church where everyone admires and reveres and adores, and Alice is that one in our church. So I was doing these exercises one evening, and Alice came in for choir practice, and she popped in and, "Hi, gang, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we're doing some exercises." And she said, "Well, what are you doing?" "Well, you don't brush Alice off. I mean, she's a wonderful woman." So I told her about how many people had left themselves behind. They'd forgotten, like Vanessa did, her 8-year-old. And I did an exercise with Alice, and I asked her, I said, "Now, how old do you feel inside?" "Oh, and I could tell she was trying to cooperate. She said, I guess I feel around 25 years old. She's 82. And I said, "Now, Alice, do you feel 25, 25 and a half, or 24 and a half? That's very important to make it concrete." "Well, actually, I feel 24 and a half. That's how old I feel." I said, "Alice, something happened to you when you were 24 and a half. Life was not working. It was not flowing. So what you did was you took the reins of life into your own hands. And when you took the reins of life into your own hands, you left that 24 and a half-year-old girl behind." And what generally happens is once somebody takes the reins of life in their own hands and leaves that one behind, and we call that person the one we left behind, they proceed to make mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake because they have separated themselves from their guidance system. They just thought it was bad breaks. And Cora Alice was looking at me with these big eyes. She's an adorable lady. And I said, "Now, can you remember what happened at 24 that encouraged you to take the reins of life in your own hand?" "Oh, heavens, I can't remember that." And I said, "Well, do you remember where you were when you were 24 and a half?" "Yes. I was living in southern Illinois in a coal mining town, and I was teaching music in the local school. In fact," she said, "you know what? At that time, that was just about the same time where I made the decision my voice was not of operatic quality. So I would stop trying to pursue a career in opera, and I would return home to my hometown of Geneseo, Illinois, where I also happened to reside, and become a music teacher in the local school." She couldn't figure out what happened that life wasn't flowing, and when she took the reins of life into her own hands, but she could remember that she lived in a coal mining town in southern Illinois, and she had made the decision at 24 and a half that her voice was not of operatic quality. She would go back home and teach school in the local school. Now, the 24 and a half-year-old, I like to say to people is, that's the one you left behind. That's your guidance system. Let me give you another example. Kyle, 30 years old, lives in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm doing these exercises with him over the phone. We went through the exercise about how old do you feel, and he said, "Well, I feel 25, but I also feel 6. And I asked him to see if he could remember what happened, and he couldn't, and so we decided to have another phone call a week later. Called him up a week later, and he said, "Tom, as soon as we hung up, I know exactly what happened at 25. I got divorced at 25, he said. And as far as 6 is concerned, let me tell you what happened to me at 6. I can still remember. I was in the back seat of our family's car. My sister was sitting right to the right of me. My mother, as we were driving through a particular neighborhood, turned around and said over her shoulder, 'Kyle, you're going to have to take first grade over again.' Kyle says, 'Tom, I can remember the clothes I was wearing. I can remember the pattern on the seat. I can remember my sister's dress. I can remember the neighborhood that we were driving through.' At 6, he left himself behind and took the reins of life into his own hands and separated himself from his guidance system. We've all done that. See, why do you need a soul coach? Because I'm going to try to make the case with you that the person whom you left behind is your treasure of treasures. It isn't that we don't know what life we're supposed to lead. We forgot. We forgot where we left that one behind. We even forgot we left somebody behind. But each of us has done it. Vanessa says, I found the dream that I had buried through all of these years. We've all done that. Or we've all projected our treasure out and have no sense that we have any intrinsic value whatsoever. The treasure of treasures, we left her or him way behind so long ago we don't even remember. We need these exercises to get in touch. Diane, Kyle's sister, same exercise. How old do you feel? Well, I feel 23, but I also feel 4. Many, many times you'll feel 2 ages. And what we want to do is we want to concentrate on the age that you were when all things were still possible. Of course, in Kyle's case, that was 6. In Vanessa's case, that was 8. And in Diane's case, she said, I feel 23 or I feel 4. And I said, well, Diane, do you have any sense of what happened to you at 4? Oh, I most certainly did. My dad divorced my mother, and he didn't divorce her. He divorced her, and he abandoned me. I've never seen him since. And she had her spines out, you know, like the porcupine when she was saying that. And then I said, well, how about 23? And she says, well, 23 is harder to get a grip on. And I said, oftentimes I'll say, can you see yourself at 23? Like Cora Alice could see herself in the coal mining town. And she said, well, my most vivid recollection of 23 is I'm sitting in a rocking chair, looking out the window, and I'm bawling my head off. Diane, why are you bawling your head off? Well, I really got wrapped up in this guy, and he dumped me. And when it happened, I spent the whole day, about 24 hours, sitting in that rocking chair sobbing. Now, I don't pretend to be a psychologist, but I said on the phone, I said, Diane, does it make sense to you that what you were experiencing at 23 was a recapitulation of what you experienced at 4? She goes, ah. If you can find where you left yourself behind, you'll discover you're recapitulating that in every major crisis throughout your life. Why do you need a soul coach? Because you're living somebody else's life. You're experiencing things that you forgot and don't know why you're experiencing them. And you've got to integrate this because that's where your treasure lies. What you've forgotten and left behind is your treasure. Then I have another friend named Valerie who told me a story that really precipitated all of this material. I'm not going to get into the story because it's critical for the exercises themselves. However, I told her story year after year after year. I finally decided I would call on her and tell her the power that this story had as I recounted it. And I stopped in, and she had left herself behind at the age of 14. Under very interesting circumstances. We had lunch, and she had a business appointment. She couldn't stay throughout the whole lunch. She had to run. So I said, well, before you run, let me just ask you a question. This 14-year-old that you left behind, who is that girl? I wanted to know what that 14-year-old represented. And with Valerie, everything always clicks. So I said, who was that girl? And without a moment's hesitation, she looked right at me and she said, why, that's my pure drop of God. That's my pure drop of God. Now, I've asked that question to other people that have taken these exercises. Some people will say something like this. They won't say pure drop of God. They'll say, well, that's my essence. That person is essentially who I am. Other people will say, that's the person I was when I was still connected to God. Some people will say one, the other, or the third, but everyone agrees with the fourth one. The one we left behind is the person for whom all things were still possible. for whom all things were still possible. And then we took the reins of life into our own hands, separated ourselves from that one. So what we've done is we've separated ourselves from all things are still possible. We went on trying to beat life around the ears with a stick, but we did it with our intellect, with our cunning, with our logic. We didn't do it with our heart. We left our heart behind. See? So not only did we proceed to make mistake after mistake after mistake, but the engine that's going to pull our train, the one for whom all things are still possible, the hopeful one, we've left that heartfelt one behind. And we're trying to pull our train with no hope, with no heart. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that when we go through these exercises and we find where we left ourselves behind, that's the point at which we stopped following our dreams. That's the point at which we stop. I can't tell you, I mean, I'd like to do this, but I can't do it. I don't think anybody can. I can't tell you what your dreams are. A lot of people say, well, I can't tell you what your dreams are, but I can tell you when you abandon them. I can tell you when you stopped believing in them. What I'd like to have you do is take a look in your own mental mirror. Teresa, how old do you feel? Sue, how old do you feel? How old do you feel? How old do you feel? Okay? Don't look at me, just reflect. How old do you feel inside? And you, the viewer, you may find yourself feeling two ages, like Vanessa did, 25 and 8, or like Kyle did, 25 and 6, or like Diane did. And the reason I mention that is because we think for propriety's sake we should have a sensible, prudent age. But there's always one in the shadows that's much younger. Okay? Have you been able to... I'll tell you this story. I did this in a group and my wife was in the group. And I had a postcard. I asked everybody to write down their ages. And then I went on and at a later point in the presentation I said, now, the age that you put down is where you left all your dreams behind. And I happened to be looking at Luann when I said that, and I could see a big blip on her EKG, all right? And afterwards, as we were driving home, I said, Luann, why did you react so? And she said, well, I put down 32. And 32, my whole life was perfect. We had the picket fence, the golden retriever. We had 2 children, neither of whom had yet gone to school. And during my 33rd year, our eldest child went to school, and the and the tread began wearing off the wheels of her life. And it was so clear to her that at 32 she lived the halcyon life that she visibly flinched when that's when you stopped following your dreams. Give yourself permission to feel a younger age, all right? It may bubble up. It may bubble up. You may find an earlier age bubbling up, all right? Here's what I like to say when people have a little trouble. When did you sell yourself out? That's rather crass. Let me tell you about my 23. When I was 23, I was in graduate school at New York University, and I was studying philosophy, I was studying wisdom. I wanted to know how, I like to say euphemistically, how to get the gumball out of the bubble gum machine. I was into wisdom, I was into knowledge. I met Luann, fell in love with her, and I thought, I've got to go back home. I was from Wisconsin. I've got to go back home and put something together economically so that I can have a life with Luann. I can always go back to graduate school. Right? I sold myself out, and I've never gone back. Okay? Now, many, many times people will find that they feel the age they were when they got married. And they'll think, well, marriage was happy. Doesn't make any difference. It's a turning point. And what you did at that particular turning point is you left the person for whom all things were still possible behind. Okay? Try to visualize yourself. Let me give you an example of Joel. Joel's a farmer in Ohio who is 40 years old. He says, I feel 25. I said, Joel, can you see yourself? Can you see where you left yourself behind? Joel says, why, absolutely. I'm at my brother's house. I'm standing by the telephone with the receiver in my ear. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, I'm a farmer. There's some land that is adjacent to my farm that came available. I kind of heard it on the QT. And I went to the banker, and very confidentially, I found out I could swing it. He'd back me. Everything was set up. I mean, I'm 25. This could put me in the big leagues in terms of farming. And all I needed was to find a realtor that would handle the paperwork. And there was an older gentleman in town who was had an excellent reputation. Spoke to him. He was going to represent me. So I'm going over on a Saturday to tell my brother about this coup that I'm in the process of being involved in. While I'm there, the phone rings. My brother answers, says, Joel, it's Dad. I get on the phone. Joel, I've got some bad news for you. That land, it's been purchased by somebody else. Who could have bought it? Nobody knew about it. How could that? The realtor's wife bought it. She says, Tom, I'm still standing there with that phone in my brother's house at the age of 25. You see, what we want to do is we want to go back and pick that 25-year-old up, because that 25-year-old is the one for whom all things are still possible. See, what we're after is wholeness. See? We want to connect with that one we left behind, our contemporary person, and that one we left behind and become whole. That's part of this whole soul coach methodology. We'll show you how to do that so that all of a sudden this one for whom all things were still possible will pull Joel's train. What we're talking about is wholeness. The exercises of the soul coach are designed to help you integrate with this one you left behind. Wholeness is important in and of itself, but it's also important to hook up with this one we left behind, because they still believe, they still dream, they still hope. They're the engine that's going to pull your train. Okay? I want to just summarize about the one we left behind. The one we left behind is about dreams. That's where we stopped dreaming. The one we left behind is where we stopped hoping. If you will, it's where we stopped believing. You know, Jesus tells us in the book of Matthew, anything is possible if you believe. Everybody says, yeah, I get it. But they stopped believing. In fact, they forgot when they stopped believing. They're now walking along on an intellectual trip. Do you realize that you've forgotten how to believe? It's the truth. Remember what Vanessa said in her excellent comment? She said, a good friend of mine, Tom, helped me to find the dream that I'd buried all through the years. Later I came to understand that that dream was my call. Does anybody here have a sense of what I mean when I say it's your call? A call has something to do with destiny in it. Okay? See, destiny means only I can do that. I'm the only one that can do that. That's what destiny means, see? So, for people who are living a life that anybody could live, and that's most of us, we need to have that sense of destiny. Only I can do that. I'm the only one that can do that. And there is a call for everyone. Only you can do this. Nobody else can do this. Only you can do it. Basically what we're saying is you need a soul coach because you're burying your treasure or you're projecting it, that you're living a life that anybody could have lived, that you've forgotten your treasure of treasures, the one you left behind, and it's all so difficult because what we're talking about is the inner look. The inner look is the most difficult thing on the face of the earth, particularly for men, but I would submit for women as well. When we're finding the one we left behind, we're finding the person who was the dreamer. We're finding the person who could still hope. We're finding our call. But I would also like to suggest to you that when we find all of this stuff, we're finding also the treasure of treasures. One last thing about the one we left behind, and then we'll wrap it up. Remember we talked about the one we left behind, your 25-year-old, if you will, your 8-year-old, your 6-year-old. That's your pure drop of God. That's your essence. That's the one you were when you were still connected with God. That's the person for whom all things are still possible. There's a fifth definition of the one we left behind. It's your unsprouted seed. Your one you left behind, your 16-year-old, your 8-year-old, your 6-year-old, is an unsprouted seed. Here's what your unsprouted seed is saying to you. Stop choking me. Stop squelching me. Let me live. Let me bloom. Let me grow. All of us are squelching, choking that unsprouted seed. Okay? Pascal said, the major cause of all problems with human beings is their inability to sit alone in a room by themselves for 24 hours. Stop choking me. Stop squelching me. Let me live. Let me grow. Well, I think I better go to the mall. Maybe I can call my girlfriend. Maybe there's a movie. I gotta get out of this room. I've got to get away from this voice. Why do you need a soul coach? You need a soul coach because the greatest thing that's ever been accomplished in this world is you. And you've got a life waiting for you to live. Remember, recall, regain, and rejoice. Thank you.